Learn how to play Age of Galaxy? Come on back after the break. Hey everybody, welcome to the show, Board Game Reviews. This is a YouTube channel all about the board gaming hobby, and this video is part of a series of videos looking at Age of Galaxy. Now, Age of Galaxy is a space colonization resource management game for 1 to 4 players, and it plays about 45 minutes. In this video, I'm going to teach you actually how to play the game. If all you're looking for is a quick overview, want to see some sample gameplay, or actually just check out a full review of the game, check out the other videos in the series. In this video, we're going to do a complete tutorial to teach you how to play the game starting from setup. So let's go ahead and look at everything, starting with just how you win the game of Age of Galaxy. The game of Age of Galaxy is going to be played out over 5 rounds, and every single round is broken down into 4 phases. You have a production phase, you have an action phase, you have the war phase, you have the galactic phase, and then finally we're going to reset things. And we're going to do this 5 times, and basically players are going to get a total of about 15 different actions. Now, there are ways for players to get extra actions. I'm going to explain that in the tutorial video, but basically most players can get 15 actions to get as many victory points as they can. Player who has the most amount of victory points at the end of the game is going to be the grand winner of the game. Now, there's a couple different ways you can accrue victory points in the game of Age of Galaxy. One of the main ways you're going to get victory points is by getting prestige. Every point of prestige you get is going to be 1 victory point at the end of the game. Another way you get victory points is by colonizing planets or by developing planets, and basically that means that you're going to get 1 victory point for every colonized planet, you're going to get 2 victory points for every planet that you happen to develop. You also get victory points for every one of the artifacts you manage to find as you're playing the game and exploring the galaxy and going out through conquest to get various different victory points. But artifacts are going to give you a 1-for-1 victory point basis also. Finally, you're going to gain victory points based on the ideology of the alliances that you make with the alien species as you go out there and travel across the galaxy. Now, it's very important that you have to actually establish an ideology with the different alliances. If you fail to do so, you're not going to get any of those extra victory points in the game. And the way you represent matching an ideology with these alien races is if you get 2 or more matching symbols. So basically, you see right here that we have an ideology that's going out there for development of different cultures. Whereas we see as if this was our alliance at the end of the game, we would not have any ideology because all 3 symbols are not the same. We don't have at least 2 matching symbols, so we won't get any of the bonus victory points. Luckily, there is an action you can take of taking a actual ideology by adding it to your alliances. That's one of the actions you can take in the game. I'll explain that when we get there, but just understand that if you don't claim an ideology before the end of the game, you're not going to get any of those bonus victory points. And the way it's simply going to work is if you do claim an ideology, you're basically going to get extra victory points based on technology ideology, whether it happens to be prestige ideology, conquest ideology, whether it happens to be development ideology, or it happens to be the ideology of going out there and finding these ancient relics that are in this ancient galaxy that you happen to be exploring, going out there trying to get victory points to win the game. To set up the game, the first thing you do is you need to lay out the prestige board, then you need to lay out the action board, and then you need to lay out the Galactic Congress and anomalies board out in a row atop for all the players to be able to access very easily. Now, the prestige board does 2 different things throughout the game. First, it's going to track your turn order, and also it's going to determine end-game victory points. And also it can be potentially, depending on the ideology that your race or your faction happens to take on, it can also be some extra victory points in the game. So this is going to track the amount of turn order as we play out the game. And again, we're also going to get some victory points based on how high we get on the prestige track. Next thing we have is our action board. This is where the players are going to take community actions. This will be open action location for all the players to access. Then finally, the Galactic Congress is a place where players can get extra victory points. If they manage to develop a planet, they can gain access to the Galactic Congress section of the board. And then anomaly sections where players can go out there and explore space. They'll also potentially get extra resources and maybe even extra victory points at the end of the game. Next, we need to figure out which 3 random trades are going to be involved in this game. Now, this game does come with multiple different trade cards, and you're only going to use 3 of these trade cards every single time you play the game. Now, these trade cards do happen to be double-sided. You want to make sure that you pick 3 trade cards and place them with this little pyramid symbol right here, or this triangle symbol facing face up. And basically, once these cards, if they ever manage to create a golden age, you're going to flip these cards over, and they're going to change just a little bit. Until a golden age has been created by this specific card, that specific card is going to stay with the triangle side face up at all times. And basically at the start of the game, we're going to randomly pick 3 of these, and we're going to place these up a board on top of our 3 boards. Now you want to lay these in a special way that you can definitely tell exactly which one of these cards is associated with which one of these little arrows on the action board right here, because as these top sections fill up with cubes, at the end of every single round, those cubes are going to move over to a specific trade card based on the arrow right here. So what that means is that any cubes that happen to be used for manufacture are going to move to this specific card right here at the end of every single round. Any cards used for retrieve are going to move to this trade card at the end of every single round. And any cubes used for scavenge are going to use to this trade card at the end of every single round. So just make sure you're following the arrows. The arrows are there, so you should be able to see them. But don't forget that every one of these specific actions is going to be associated with a specific trade card. And again, you're going to randomly shuffle up these trade cards. Pick 3 of them every time you play this game. Next up, every single player is going to take a player board. Now, these player boards are double-sided. So far, until there's extra Kickstarter goals, I don't see any difference between these boards. So simply, every single player is going to take one of these trade boards. And on the trade board, this is going to be your personal tech tree. Now, I want to go over these very, very quickly because these tech trees do matter. And it's going to help you evolve your empire based on how you're going to evolve your tech tree. Now, the important thing to understand about these tech trees is that these tech trees is a step ladder, and you have to go up this tech tree to move up to the more powerful techs. So before you can get a 3rd tier tech, you need to buy a 2nd tier tech, and before you buy a 2nd tier tech, you need to buy a 1st level technology. And every one of these technologies does branch up. So before you can get this technology right here, plasma weapons, you need to get the technology that's directly below it. So you'd have to get laser weapons. Now, it slightly changes once you move up to level 2. Once you move up to a level 2 technology, it actually connects to the 2 or possibly 3 technologies that are above it. And basically the way it's going to work is that this technology of plasma weapons is connected to antimatter and to xenology. But if you go over here and look in the middle one of hyperspace scanner, that one's connected to xenology. Antimatter missiles is also connected to planetary shields. So basically, if you want to get planetary shields, you need to make sure that you get either one of these 2 middle technologies. If you want to get antimatter missiles, you need to get one of these 2 technologies. If you want to get xenology, you can get any one of the 3 technologies. Basically, this one is going to lead up to here, and then it's going to lead up to these 2. This one will lead up to here, which will lead up to these 3. This one will lead to here, which will go ahead and lead up to those 2 technologies. But basically, once every player has their own single tech board, next thing every single player do is going to take a resource tracker, which is a monitor of their current income. And that's going to start at 3, and our current amount of funds that we have in our empire is going to start with 0 for every single one of the players. So 3 for income, 0 for current amount of money that our empire currently has. Now, next thing we need to do is we need to figure out what kind of cards we're going to work on in our alliance. Before we draft the alliance, though, every single player needs to take 9 ships in the color that they've chosen. Now, it's important to understand that while you do get 9 ships, you're actually never allowed to have more than 5 ships active at any time in your empire. So while you do have 9, and there can be more out across the board, you can never have more than 5 available to deploy at any single time. Every single player is also going to start with 16 cubes. Now, you're going to take one of the cubes, you're going to place it at the 0 spot on the prestige board. And this is also, like I said, going to determine turn order. Now, turn order is based on whoever is stacked highest, and multiple players have to be stacked at the same prestige level. So if we have me playing a game between the red player and the blue player, every single player is going to get all their cubes, and they're going to get their starships. And then if blue wants to be the first player, they're going to stack on top of red. And remember, whoever is highest up in the stack is going to be the first player. But if a player happens to be ever higher up in the prestige track than another player, then they're actually be the first player. And then once we figure out the player order, every single player is going to take a player order token. Now, in this example, we see that blue is going to be first player, red is going to be second player. Again, this game does play up to 4 players, but right now we're just playing a 2-player game, the sample game, where the blue player is going to be player number 1 and the red player is going to be player number 2. Now, of course, the big question in all these kind of games is who's going to be the first player. Well, generally the rules in this game say the first player is the person who won the game last time you played. If this is the first time you're playing the game, then it says that the person who owns the game is actually the first player. But generally speaking, once we played a few games, it's always going to be the person who won the last game is always going to be the first player when it comes to the game of Age of Galaxy. Now we figured out who our first player is, we're simply going to move on to go ahead and pick our alliance. Now this is where you get a couple different options. Now when you're first learning the game, the basic way to take an alliance is every single player is going to be dealt a hand of exactly 7 cards. And then players get to go through these cards, and they're going to figure out exactly which one of the alliances they're going to get. And they're going to pick a couple of cards, go through their hand, and they discard anywhere from 0 to 3 cards. Once they figure out how many cards they're going to discard, they're going to fill their hand back up to 7 cards again. Now, it's a basic way to learn how to play the game, and I highly suggest you play that way the first couple times you play the game, because you're not going to understand all the complexities of the game itself. Once players are familiar with the rules of the game, though, I highly suggest you do the drafting method, which is how you're supposed to play the game, once the players are experienced with the rules. And the simple way that's going to work is every single player is going to start with a hand of 7 Alliance Alien cards. You're literally your entire hand of 7 cards. You're going to pick one of the cards, you're going to keep it, and you take the other 6 cards, and you pass it to the next player in line. That player is also going to be doing the exact same thing, and they're also going to hand you a hand of 6 cards. Just simply look at those 6 cards you've been handed, you're going to take one of them, place it down, and pass the remaining 5 cards to the next player. And you're going to keep doing this until you have 7 cards down in front of you. Once that is done, every single player now has their hand of 7 Alliance cards, and now we're ready to move further onto the setup for the game. Next up, players are going to pick their starting alliance, but before we go ahead and explain the starting alliance, let's go and explain how all these alliance cards work, because it's going to influence which your starting alliance is going to be. So every one of these alliance cards is broken down with a couple different sections. The top section right here happens to be the ideology that this specific race happens to stand behind. Now remember, there's multiple ideologies, and you have to have at least one main ideology before the end of the game to get those extra victory points. If you fail to do so, you can lose on a good chunk of victory points. So make sure you're working towards getting at least one main ideology, and there's two different ways to do so. I'll explain it when we get to that point of the instructional video here. But next section we're here is going to have the debut bonus that you're going to get as soon as you play this race as your active race. Now the trick here is that you can have 3 active races throughout the entire game. And once a race is debuted as your active race, or one of your 3 active races, it cannot be undebuted. You cannot remove it from the board anymore. So debuting your race is a permanent decision. So make sure you're laying down a race that is going to help you with your strategies as much as possible, because it's going to be a permanent race. And again, you can never have more than 3 races. So the moment you play a race, you're going to get whatever bonus happens to be right over here on this card. The symbol right here is going to show how many Star Destroyers or cruisers or spaceships, whatever you want to refer to them as, how many of those spaceships you're going to get immediately at the start of the game or anytime you debut that race. The next thing is going to show you how much money you're going to get immediately. Now this is not income. It's not going to affect your income, which is that orange disc. It's actually going to affect how much money you currently have in your empire. Next thing, you're going to see 2 special powers that this race is going to give you access to. Now some powers are permanent powers, which means that they're going to give you an ability such as this one. It says anytime you lose one of your starships, you are going to gain 2 money instantly. It's not income. You're just going to gain 2 money, kind of like as a resource for losing those spaceships. But as long as this race is in play and you control it, you have that special power. Whereas you see over here that you may spend 2 times the cost of manufacturing in place of a develop action. So basically, since it's a mechanical race, they can actually use manufacturing in place of development. So it's the special power of this race. So just understand that if this special race doesn't give you extra powers. Now other races may actually do different things, such as giving you actually technologies that you have to unlock. And once you gain these technologies, you're then going to have access to that power. And tell the difference if it's going to be a technology you need to unlock, just look for this blue square with a star pattern on top of it. If it has to be that, that means you have to actually develop that technology before you have access to that power. Once you've developed that technology, you have access to the power for the rest of the game, but just understand the slight difference. There's no blue square with a star pattern on it. That means it's a permanent power once they join your alliance. But as with that blue square with that star pattern, that means you do not gain access to that power until you actually manage to develop that technology. Additionally, you're also going to see this thing that looks like a down arrow right here. And that means that as soon as you play that empire by debuting it to make it join your alliance, you're going to gain that one-time ability immediately. And that's what that down arrow happens to be. So the next thing you're going to see that on the bottom of every one of these races or these alliances is going to be a environment that they can go ahead and terraform. So you cannot terraform any planets unless you have at least one alliance race that matches the environment of the planet. So you see that this race can terraform any ice planet. This race right here also can develop any kind of ice planet, whereas this race right here can develop any kind of fire planet. And this race right here can go ahead and develop any plant-based planet. Now there's multiple different planets. There is actually one kind of planet that you can only develop through a technology. I go and explain that when we get there. But understand all but one of the planets can be developed as long as you have at least one race in your alliance that has a matching symbol showing that they can go ahead and terraform that kind of planet. Finally, every one of these cards, and remember, you only get 7 of these cards. You're never going to draw any more of these cards throughout the entire game. So make sure you're factoring that into your strategy. But finally, these cards can also be discarded for a one-time income of some kind. Usually you're going to discard these for a certain amount of money. So for example, if this card is not part of my alliance, remember, once it joins your alliance, you cannot make any changes. It's permanent. But this card happens to be in my hand. I can discard this card immediately and gain 3 money. Now it's not income. Remember, yellow is not income. That's your current amount of money. Orange is income only. But I can discard this card at any time to go ahead and get 3 money for my empire to spend on my turn. Now the game of Age of Galaxy does use a lot of symbols, and there is a nice hint card that comes with the game that's explaining what all the symbols mean, such as money, such as technology, such as learning techs themselves, such as manufacturing, such as starships, such as relics, prestige, strength of your empire, learning other things for your empire, gaining different things, but it's basically explained on this nice little handy dandy card that does come with the game. There's also some additional rules in the rule book. Now I'm not going to slow down the video by going over every single one of these. If you have any questions, this card should answer them pretty darn well with how all these different faction powers work. If not, it's going to be explained in the rule book pretty darn well, and it should cover it pretty darn well for you. Now that you understand how the alliance cards work, every single player is going to look at their hand of 7 cards and they're going to pick their debut alliance. And they're simply going to play that alliance face up, and they're immediately going to gain whatever resources they gain from debuting that alliance. And that may be anything from starships to money or any combination in between, but they're going to gain that resource immediately. So for example, for this player, we're going to gain 5, which then put us from 0 all the way up to 5 as our current amount of money we have in our empire. Whereas this player is going to gain 1 starship that they can use this round, and also going to gain 3 money, putting them at a 3 income and a 3 money. Once we've selected our debut alliance, there's just a couple of things we need to do with these boards out here, depending on their current player count, and then we're going to go ahead and set up the Galactic Empire board itself. So the first thing you notice on every one of these boards is you're going to have a 3+ and a 4+ symbol on a lot of these cards. That basically means that those slots are only available if you're playing with 3 or 4 players. So since in this tutorial video I'm showing you how to play only a 2-player game, we're going to need to cover up some spaces on every one of these cards. So we're playing a 2-player game, so we're going to cover up the 3 slot on every single one of these cards, signifying that we do not have access to those spaces at all. They're basically dead slots for this game. Also, since we're not playing a 4-player game, we're going to do the same thing with the 4+ symbol, because again, we're not playing a 4+ player game. We're simply playing a 2+ player game. Now again, if we were playing a 3-player game, I would not put out any of those yellow cubes, and if we're playing a 4-player game, I wouldn't put out the yellow or the green cubes. But since we're playing a 2-player game only, those spaces are not available to either of our players for this entire game. So next thing we need to do is go ahead and set up our galaxy. So to set up the galaxy, we're going to take these galaxy tiles right here, and these cards for the galaxies, there are more galaxy cards than you'll ever need in every single game, because we're only going to use 5 of these galaxy cards every single time we play a game. You're simply going to shuffle up all these different locations, and we're going to draw 5 of these cards. The first 2 of them we're going to place face up. That's going to allow the players to know what their current galaxy that they're fighting over happens to contain with planets and exploration tokens, but the next 3 tiles or cards are going to be placed face down, kind of as a surprise, so the players do not know what's coming up in the future of the galaxy. The rest of these cards are going to be removed from the game. We are not going to use them anymore for the rest of the game. Next thing we need to do is we need to hand all the players a single one of these hint cards and tell them a turnover card. Now this is a double-sided card on the back side. It's going to tell them the rewards they're going to get when we go to the war phase of every single round. Whoever has the most strong empire is going to get some extra victory points, or I should say some extra prestige, which is going to be victory points in the game. They may also get some extra income. That's going to be based on the amount of players that are currently playing the game and where they stand in the galactic order with their current war fleet. For every single one of the cards gets these double-sided cards, again, turn order on the back side. Front side is going to tell them exactly what kind of resources they're going to get during the galactic war phase. Once every one of our players has those tokens, we just need to populate this board, because one of the great things about this game is going to be modified based on the amount of players that are playing the game. So some of these galaxy tiles you're going to notice are not going to have any extra symbols on it, which means that you're going to use every single one of these planets every single time you play this game. Doesn't matter on the amount of players. Whereas otherwise you may see some of these cards that may have some shadow symbols on them to signify that those planets are only going to be in this game if you have that many players. So for example, this symbol right here signifies that we are going to have a planet here if we have 3 or 4 more players. And the way we're going to do that is with these tokens right here, we're going to randomly grab one of these face down without looking at it before we do so. And then we're simply going to place it right here, signifying that now this planet is going to look like this for this game only. Next up, we're going to see these symbols that happen to be this little starburst pattern, and it's either going to be next to a number of a 3+ or 4+, meaning that's only going to be filled up if we have a 3 or 4 player game. Or you may notice a star pattern without a player number on it. There's no player number on it. We're always going to fill up that space with one of these little tokens right here. And again, these are randomly shuffled face down, and we are not going to reveal these until we actually explore those locations. And again, if we have any of these symbols that have the 3 or the 4 player symbol, we're only going to fill those up if we happen to be playing a 3 or a 4 player game. Since we're playing a 2-player game, we are not going to worry about those. We're going to put those off to the side. That's basically our galaxy setup. Our players are ready to start the game. Let's go ahead and start the game of Age of Galaxy. Now the game of Age of Galaxy is going to be played out over 5 rounds. And every single round we're going to be interacting with the different locations on the galaxy. And generally speaking, most of the time the players cannot go beyond the current galaxy tile, and that's signified by the current fleet token. Every single round, at the end of the round, the fleet token is going to advance, but generally speaking, the players can only interact with the galaxy tile where the fleet token currently is. Now there is a technology that does break that rule, and that's going to be a technology that allows you to have the warp engines. If you happen to have warp drives, you can actually go 1 tile ahead, and that's another reason why we got to see the next tile that happens to be in advance. But basically, like I said, the game's been played out over 5 rounds. Every single round is broken down into 4 phases. And the phases are going to be the production phase, the action phase, the war phase, and then finally the galactic phase. Now there's one little caveat to that, and that's going to be in the first round. In the first round only, there is no war phase. So round 1 is going to be production, action, galactic. Then rounds 2, 3, 4, and 5 are going to be production, action, war, and then galactic phase. So let's go ahead and break everything down into the production phase to go ahead and start things off. At the start of every single action phase, players are simply going to take 3 cubes of their color from their starting pile, and these are going to be the action cubes that are going to signify how many actions they have to take this round. Now, players may also end up getting starships in their hand that will be part of their hand with their 3 cubes. The important thing to understand here is, like I said earlier, you can never have more than 5 starships in your hand. So if you ever manage to produce more than 5 starships, the extra starships are going to go to waste. And also understand that you only have a hand or a total supply of 9 starships. You only have a total supply of 15 cubes. Once those are all used up, there are no extras. The game is designed to work, so that shouldn't be a problem. But generally speaking, you only get 15 actions, 15 cubes, 9 warships, 9 starships, whatever you want to call them. You can never have more than 5 starships in your hand actively at a time. Next up, players are going to gain a certain amount of money based on their current income that they happen to have. So for example, this empire has an income of 3, so we go up to 5, all the way up to 8 as our current amount of money we have to spend this round or future rounds. And this empire we see right here also has an income of 3, because we all start with a 3 income. So we're going to go from 3 all the way up to 6 as our current amount of money. Once players gain their income, after they gain their income, every single player's current income is going to go down 1 point. That means you are going to continue to lose income every single round unless you find a way to produce more income. So if you never produce more income, after 3 rounds, you're not going to have any income or any money anymore. So make sure you're making that part of your strategies and playing smart and playing very tactically, and making sure you keep an income coming for your empire. The final thing players can do for the production phase is they can activate any powers for any of the alliance races they've managed to happen to join their alliance. Now, I don't want to keep harping on this, but it's a very important rule. Remember, you can never have more than 3 alliances as part of your faction, but you can activate those alliance powers in any order. So activate them in the way that's the most advantageous to you, and you get to pick the way you're going to activate them. But you don't have to, you may activate any alliance powers that you happen to have for any alliances you currently have face up. Now, the important thing is you can only play 1 of these alliance cards from your hand for any one of the various actions you can play with these cards once per turn. Now, that's not once per round, that's once per turn. And you play the card before you take your action, after you take your action, and again, you don't have to do so, because remember, you only get a total of 7 of these cards throughout this entire game. You're going to be taking 15 actions. You can only play 3 of these cards as your alliances. So remember those numbers, because it's very important. It's also going to influence how you want to play your strategies. After the players do their production phase, and again, the production phase is nice because all the players can do this simultaneously, we're going to move over to the action phase. During the action phase, players are going to take their actions 1 at a time, and every single player is going to get a chance to play 1 of their action cubes. And then after every single player has played 1 of their action cubes, we're going to continue going around until all players have spent all their action cubes. Now, generally speaking, players are only going to have 3 action cubes unless they manage to trigger a golden age, and that may give them up to 6 actions on a turn, but I'll explain how golden age works when we get to that point. But basically, a player is simply going to take their action cube, and they're going to take their action cube to take an action. Now, the action they take is going to influence exactly where this action cube happens to go. Basically, you have the shared actions for all the players, such as the manufacture, the retrieve, and the scavenge action. When you take those actions, you're simply going to place the cube in those specific spaces, whereas opposed where you have the develop action, where you can place one of these cubes down on a planet to develop a planet. You're going to have the research action, which allows you to place this cube down on your tech tree, which allows you to unlock technologies. You're going to have the trade action, which is going to allow you to put one of the cubes on one of these trade cards, and you're going to take the action of that specific trade card. Next thing you can do is you're going to have the colonize action. Now, to colonize a location, you can only colonize a planet that's already been developed, and they're simply going to place a second cube on top of that planet to signify that you managed to colonize that planet. The next action you do is you can go ahead and do an explore action. Now, to do an explore action, it does require you to have one of your starships built in your hand. They cannot be in your supply. It has to be one of the 5 that you do have in your hand. And to do the action, you're simply going to discard that starship, and you're going to explore any one of these exploration tokens. Now, generally, you can only explore an exploration token in the current galaxy where the Galactic Fleet token happens to be, unless you manage to develop the warp drives, which allows you to go 1 sector forward. So, for example, it happened to be the red player's turn. They could take their cube right here, take the explore action, which means that they're going to take this cube over here on the anomalies board right here. They will discard their starship right here, and then they're going to reveal this token right here, which is going to give them a bonus. We're simply going to grab those tokens, and then we're going to discard this token. So in this case, we'd gain some relics, and we'd also gain some technology here. So we simply discard that token, grab the symbols, and we'd have those as additional resources that we can spend. The final action we can do is going to do the nominate action. Now, doing the nominate action means we're going to place a token over here, which is going to give us extra prestige, which again is going to be worth victory points. That's the basic overview of how all these actions take it. So let's go ahead and take these actions and look at every one of these actions and show you exactly how they work. Before I explain the actions though, there's one or just a couple of important caveats here to explain with the rules. The first thing to understand is that generally speaking, once you place a cube, you're not going to get that cube back. So you're going to play that cube wherever it happens to go, and it's going to stay at the location for the rest of the game. Next thing you need to understand is that if you have at least one action cube, it's mandatory that you have to take an action. You are not allowed to sacrifice or give or pass up your action. If you have at least one cube, you have to do something, even if it's going to be a simple action of doing a scavenge action. You are required to spend your action cube when it comes to your turn. It is a mandatory action. Next up, you can, before or after you do your action, you can play a card from your hand. Again, do that once per turn, not once per round. You can do that once per turn, so that's very important. And again, you can play that alliance card for any one of its multiple uses, whether to play it as an alliance card, whether it's to play, just get the resources, whatever happens to be, but you can play it before your action, or you can play it after your action. So that's a very important thing to understand. Next up, some of the alliances that you're going to manage to gain alliance with are going to have some special powers that are signified by a lightning bolt. Basically, that lightning bolt means that that is an action that you can take, and you're going to take that action and gain whatever it happens to be. So in this example, for this race right here, we see that they have the power of discard one relic to go ahead and gain 5 money immediately. So that is an action that you can take before or after you do the trade action. These are one-time use only. So some of them are multi-use. You just need to watch them, read them carefully, but just understand that you can take that action and you do the action before or after you take your actual action with your action cube. There's just 2 more things to understand or to explain to you very, very quickly, and that's to understand, I've already mentioned this before, but just a reminder, the top 3 actions right here can lead to a golden age, because at the end of every single round, any cubes left in these spaces are going to transfer up to these trade cards right here. And once a trade card is completely filled up, it is going to trigger a golden age at the end of the round. And you can trigger multiple golden ages. So understand, if all 3 of these cards get filled up at one time, that's going to trigger one large golden age, even though no player can get back more than 3 action cubes from a golden age, even if it's multiple golden ages. So make sure you're not getting too large of a golden age, because you may end up cheating yourself with your strategies. But I'll explain that when we get to the golden ages. The next thing to understand is that while all of these actions do have costs, some of the alliances that you have in this game are going to influence how the costs are going to be reflected. Some will make the costs go up, some may make the costs go down, or some may allow you to pay different costs in place of different things. For example, that mechanical empire that I showed you, or that mechanical alliance I showed you earlier, they can actually use the manufacture action in place of the develop action. Again, it's listed on the racial card. Just understand those are things they're going to modify how these different actions work. But let's go ahead and look at all these actions, starting with the action of colonize. Now, the action of colonizing is a way that you're going to get end-game victory points. It's also a way to get resources immediately, because once you colonize a planet, you're immediately going to gain those resources. Now, to colonize a planet, there is one major restriction. You cannot colonize a planet unless at least one of your alliance races matches the symbol on the planet you're trying to colonize. So, for example, we're playing with a blue player. We see that I can only colonize, since I only have one alliance race right now, I can only colonize water planets. So looking out here, we see that there is no water planet available except for the water planet I've already taken. Because one other thing that's important to understand about the colonize action is you cannot colonize past the current location of the Galactic fleet. So the Galactic fleet happened to be right here. That means I have access to these 2 Galactic card tiles right here. But since the tile actually is currently right here, that means I cannot go past that unless I happen to have the warp technology. So the way you're going to do a colonize action is simply going to take your cube and you're going to pick a planet that you can colonize based on technologies or your current alliances, and you're simply going to place the cube down on that planet. Now, the cost of doing this is going to be the cost of how many planets you have before you take the colonize action. So if you happen to currently only have 1 planet on the entire galactic board right now, it's going to cost you 1 money, and you're simply going to spend the money, take your cube, place it on the planet, and you're going to gain whatever resources that planet happens to give you, and then your action is going to be finished. Now, there's a couple of caveats to the colonize action. You cannot colonize a planet that has actually been colonized by another player. You cannot colonize a planet that's actually been taken over by a warship. So if a player happens to have a warship on a planet, you have no way to colonize that planet at all. You can't send your ships there, or you can't even send your ships there to take it over from them. Once a planet already has a warship on it, then no other player can colonize that planet. And the final thing to understand is you're going to notice that some of these planets have a mountain symbol on it. The only way a planet with a mountain symbol can ever be colonized is with a terraform action. There are no races that actually have the terraform symbol, at least not yet in the base set. So the only way you're going to be able to terraform any one of these mountainous planets is by researching the terraforming technology, but that's basically the colonize action. The next action available to our players is going to be the action of developing. Now, to do a develop action is basically going to cost you 7 money to do so, and you can only develop a planet that you've already colonized. And the way you symbolize this is you're going to take your cube and you're place on top of your colonized planet to signify that that planet has been colonized. Now, make sure you understand, just like colonizing, you cannot develop another player's planet. You can only develop your own planets. And again, if there's a warship there or something like that, you cannot develop the planet. It has to be a colonized planet where you have one of your cubes. You're simply going to spend 7 money and you can go ahead and develop that planet. And now that planet, as long as it's not taken over from you before the end of the game, is worth 2 victory points for you, or possibly more, depending on the ideology that happens before your alliance. Now, there are a couple of different bonuses that do come with the develop action. The first big bonus that comes with develop action is once you have developed at least one planet, you can now interact with the Galactic Congress, which is worth a set amount of victory points. And as you see, that's a diminishing amount of victory points or prestige as the game goes on. So the sooner you get here, the more prestige, which is me victory points, you can get at the end of the game by doing the nominate action. But you cannot take the nominate action until you manage to at least develop at least one planet in the game. So again, it is kind of a race to do so, to be the first to go ahead and develop a planet, so you can go ahead to the Galactic Congress and get those extra prestige points. The other very nice thing about developing a planet is the first time a planet is developed by you, and again, every planet is going to be developed one time, but as soon as you develop a planet, you're going to gain immediately 1 prestige point, and then you get to pick 1 additional reward on top of that. And you can pick this as soon as you develop the planet, so it's not something you wait on and decide on later. You're basically going to take 1 money and 1 extra permanent income. And again, remember, your income goes down every single round, so that may be something to be very, very valuable to you. Or you can take 1 point of influence, which is represented by these tokens right here. And influence can be spent for various different things, such as using the nominate action to go ahead and gain those prestige points, which are worth victory points at the end of the game. The next possible action you can take on your turn is going to be the manufacture action. Now, manufacturing is allow you to build your starships. Remember, starships allow you to do exploration. They're also going to help you during the war part of every single phase. So warships can be very, very important. The important thing to understand is, like I said, you can never have more than 5 built in your hand. It doesn't include the warships that you're going to have out here on the Galactic Empire. You just never have more than 5 in your hand. And do the manufacture action, you're simply going to place your action cube down here on the manufacturer section of the board right here, and then you're going to spend 2 money for every single warship that you want to build. Now, you can build multiple ships for 1 single action, so if you happen to have 10 money and no warships in your hand, you can go ahead and build 5 warships immediately. But you build as many as you want for that 1 single action. And remember, these will be used later for the war phase, so they are very, very useful and very, very handy, and they're also used for exploration. So make sure you're factoring that into your strategies. The next action we have access to is going to be the retrieve action. You're simply going to take one of your cubes, place it down right here, and if you happen to have any of these discovery tokens in your hand, you can spend 3 money to turn one of these discovery tokens into a relic. Now remember, relics are worth victory points at the end of the game, but they're also a resource, and they're also good to use with other different alliance races, can give you extra different powers. So while they are worth victory points, they can also give you extra benefits. So converting your discoveries into relics can be worth a lot of victory points or a lot of potential to keep on making extra actions every single turn. The next action available to all our players is going to be the scavenge action. You're simply going to take your cube, place it down here, and you're simply going to take 1 money as your simple action. Again, this could be a good action, it may be a bad action, but it is something that is available to you. Because remember, it is mandatory. You have to spend 1 of your cubes every single time your turn comes around. You cannot pass. So there's nothing else that's viable for you. That's 1 action you do, is go ahead and scavenge it, go ahead and take 1 money. The next action available to all the players is going to be the trade action. Now, the trade action is going to allow you to access to any one of the trade cards that happen to be on top. Now, the trade actions are on a first come, first served basis. So the first person to go there is the one who's allowed to take that trade action. And not only that, you cannot hate draft. You can only use a trade action if you can, or I'm sorry, you can only place your cube on that specific trade action if you can actually pay for it and use that action itself. And the reason why I say that is because there is a limited amount of spaces available on every single one of these trade cards. If all the spaces happen to be full, that means you cannot use that trade card specifically anymore. Remember, these cubes are also going to slide up, which is also going to fill up these trade cards extremely quickly. So basically the way this works is you're going to basically pay the cost of the trade card, place your cube there, and take the trade action. It's mandatory that you have to be able to use it. If you place your token there, you have to use it. No hate drafting, no blocking, or no forcing an early golden age if you cannot use the location, because you have to be able to use the trade action before you can do so. And it's simply every one of these trade cards is going to have a cost, and it's going to have a reward for doing that cost. You pick which one of these you want to do, you gain the rewards, and you go ahead and let the next player take their turn. Next up is the Explore action. Now, the Explore action requires you have at least 1 ship to spend. It means you have to have at least 1 ship built. And basically, you're going to use the Explore action to go ahead and explore these different anomalies out here. Now, there has to be an anomaly available to explore, and you have to be able to reach it, which means it has to be within the certain areas that the Galactic Fleet has reached. And again, unless you research warp technology, which allows you to go 1 tile ahead of the other players. And there's any tokens right here, you're simply going to discard your 1 ship. You're going to reveal whatever that resource happens to be. You're going to gain those resources. This token is going to be discarded, and you're going to take your cube and you'll place it over here in the anomaly section right over here. The only trick to this is do the explore action. You have to have at least 1 fleet strength. Now, fleet strength in this game is a symbol represented by shields right here. So to have any sort of fleet strength, that means you have to develop at least 1 level of technology, unless you have an alliance race that also gives you fleet strength. Now, these shield symbols are cumulative, which means that if you happen to get all the way up to the level 3 on this tech tree right here, that means you do have a total fleet strength of 4. Now, fleet strength is going to be very important when we get to the war phase. I'll explain to you why it's important when we get to the war phase. But just understand, do the explore action. There has to be an explore token available. You have to be able to reach it. You have to discard one of your ships to do the explore action, and you're simply going to take the token, gain whatever resources happen to be on the token, discard that token, and the next player gets to go. And your cube is going to be left right here, and it's very important. Like I said earlier, spent cubes, generally speaking, are going to remain wherever you spent them, and the next player gets to take their turn. Next up, we have the nominate action. Now, I've already kind of explained the nominate action itself, but basically to do the nominate action, you need to have at least 3 prestige. I'm sorry, you need to have at least 3 influence. I apologize. It has to be at least 3 influence, and you have to have at least 1 plan that you have managed to develop. If you reach those 2 criteria, you're simply going to place your cube over here on the Galactic Congress board, and you gain that amount of prestige immediately. Remember, prestige is victory points. It's also player order. So the blue player happens to get that location. They are now going to be at 4 on the prestige board, which means they're going to be the first player in future rounds, which means they have the first choice of planets. So it's very important to do this action as quickly as possible, because the sooner you get it, the more prestige you're going to get, which is also going to be end game victory points. And there are only so many nominate spaces on the board. So again, like I said, first come, first serve. Get those planets developed, because that's going to be end game victory points. Now, the only thing left to explain so far for the last of the action is going to be the research action. Now, the research action is going to allow you to develop up your tech tree. Now, to develop your tech tree, you're going to notice that there's a couple blue cubes, and there's also going to be a blue cube with a star pattern on it. Now, the blue cubes are going to be easier to research technologies, but the technologies that have the star pattern on them are the ones that be a little bit harder to research, and I'll explain how that works right now. To research a technology, you're simply going to take your action cube and you're going to place your action cube down on the technology you want to research. Now, to research a technology is either going to cost you 3 money, or it's going to cost you 1 discovery token, unless it's one of the technologies that has a star pattern on it. Then it's going to cost you either 3 money and 1 discovery token, or it's going to cost you 2 discovery tokens to go ahead and research that technology. Now, I explained earlier how the tech tree works, where you have to learn the earlier technologies before you learn the upper technologies. So I'm not going to go over that again, but just understand every technology developed costs you 3 or 1 discovery, unless it happens to be one of the top tier discoveries. Then it's going to be 3 plus plus a discovery token, or 2 discovery tokens. And also understand that there are some races that also happen to have that star pattern on it, which means you're also going to have to pay that higher cost to learn that technology for that alliance race. Next up comes the war phase. Now, the war phase is pretty darn easy. We're basically going to compare whoever has the most amount of warships active in their empire. Now, again, these have to be built warships in your hand, not out here on the board. That be built warships in your hand. Whichever player has the most of these amount of warships, or these cruisers, is going to gain a reward. And these rewards are listed on the back of every one of these hint cards that every single player gets. And the amount of the reward is going to be based on the amount of players playing the game. So in a 2-player game, whoever has the most warships is going to gain 1 money and 1 prestige. If we happen to be playing a 3-player game, whoever has the most is going to gain 2 money, 1 prestige. Second place is going to get 1 prestige. And you see, if we go up to a 4-player game, that means that first, second, and third is going to gain some resources, but the person in last place is not going to gain any of those resources. Now, when it comes to the tiebreaker, let's say both of our players happen to have 2 warships built right here like this. The tiebreaker is going to be the amount of strength your empire has. Now, remember, strength is going to be the cumulative amount of these shields. So in this example, we had red versus blue. Both these empires happen to have 2 warships or 2 cruisers. We're going to see the tiebreaker is going to be in blue favor, because they also happen to have a 4 strength, because they research all these technologies. So strength is going to be the tiebreaker, but if we have a situation one person obviously has more warships than the other player, then they're obviously going to be the winner. We don't need to compare the strengths of those individual empires. Now, there's one additional advantage to having more cruisers than the other players. Now, again, this means more cruisers, not tiebreaker with the shields. This is actually having more cruisers than any other single player at the table. If you happen to have any more cruisers than any other single player at the table, you are actually become the overlord for this round. Becoming the overlord actually allows you to start taking planets away from the other players, which means you're taking away their victory points. Now, they may not be worth victory points for you either, unless you have the proper ideology, but they can also take victory points away from other players. So, for example, If the blue player became the overlord, they could take this planet away from, oops, I guess I should use the red player here in this example and make a lot more sense the way I managed to build up this board. So let's say the red player happened to be the overlord this turn. They can send out one of their cruisers and take this planet away from this player. Now they're not going to gain any resources, but this does mean that this blue player no longer controls this developed planet. It's now controlled by the red player. Neither one of these players are going to get victory points for it at the end of the game unless they have the proper ideology, but you effectively have stripped 2 victory points away from the blue player in this instance. Now the caveat to this is the overlord can only attack planets that are reachable, obviously, because you only attack planets that are reachable. The next caveat to this is you cannot attack any planet that happens to be protected. Now how do you figure out if a planet happens to be protected? Well, there is a technology that can protect planets, and that's going to be the technology right here, planetary shields, which means that all of your developed planets cannot be attacked. Additionally, if you have enough ships in your war fleet, you can potentially also protect your planets, because you can protect as many planets as you have warships in your war fleet. So for example, this player only happened to have 1 planet they controlled. They happen to only have 1 cruiser. This 1 cruiser can protect this planet, so that means that red cannot come in there and attack that planet, because 1 cruiser will protect 1 planet. Additionally, you can also have the technology. Let's say this player had managed to research the proper technologies, and it also researched the planetary shields. That also means that the red player cannot attack the blue player's planet right here. So there are ways to protect your planets, but if you have unprotected planets, whether you don't have enough warships to protect your planets, or you don't have the proper technologies, then the current overload can go ahead and attack your planets. Now it's kind of an all or nothing situation when it comes to protecting your planets. If you happen to have a lot of planets because you didn't build up properly and you just weren't playing smartly, let's say you happen to have all 4 of these planets, but you only have 1 warship. 1 warship cannot protect all 4 of your planets. Matter of fact, it cannot protect any of your planets at all. You must have 1 warship for every single planet you control, or planetary shields in it to make up the difference. So to emphasize that point, let's say that we had planetary shields, we happen to have 1 warship, and we have the planetary shields. That means that this current blue player in this current situation currently has all their planets protected, because this warship right here can protect this growing colony right here, plus the planetary shields protects both of these developed planets right here. So you need to have a combination of planetary shields and total warships to protect yourself from other players attacking you during the war phase. Finally, we're going to end the war phase by all the players counting up the current amount of strength they currently have in their empire, and then they cannot have a current amount of cruisers in excess of their current strength. So in this example, we see the red player currently has no war strength at all. That means they must discard both of the cruisers back to their building pile right there. Whereas the blue player happens to have 1 shield. That means they can keep their 1 current warship or their current cruiser right here. So it's important to make sure that you're building very, very smart, not overbuilding your cruisers when you don't have enough strength to keep those cruisers built at the end of every single war phase. After the war phase, we are now going to move over to the Galactic phase. Now for the Galactic phase, the first thing we're going to do is we're simply going to advance the Galactic token onto the next tile. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to reveal the next Galactic board. And again, if we have any symbols, we need to make sure that we're covering up with discovery tokens. Or if we have the right player count, we need to make sure that we are adding planets to the Galactic board if we have the correct player count. If we don't need to worry about that at all. And the next thing we are going to do is we're going to see if we potentially have a golden age. Now to see if we have a golden age, we're going to advance any cubes that happen to be in the top 3 rows over to the respective trade cards. Now if we manage to do this and the trade card is not filled up, we are not going to have a golden age. But let's say, just to create some chaos and some extra fun, let's say we do happen to create a golden age by moving up all these tokens right here. If we do create a golden age, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the total amount of tokens that we're going to have, and we're simply going to pull all these tokens off. And then the players are potentially going to get these tokens. Now I say potentially because you can never get more than a maximum of 3 cubes back, meaning that you're never going to have more than 6 cubes for the next round. But we're simply going to take every single one of these trade cards that create a golden age. We are going to flip them over, and they're going to stay flipped over for the rest of the round. Then every single cube that is removed up to a maximum of 3 is going to be returned to that player. And they're going to be able to use those cubes on the next round on top of their income of 3 cubes. So it does mean if you properly trigger a golden age, it is possible for you on the next round to have a total of 6 actions. But again, if you happen to trigger a large golden age where you have about 5 or 6 or 7 cubes that come back to you, not going to happen, but in case it does happen, remember you're only going to get a max of 3 of those cubes back. So the max amount of actions you're ever going to get is a total of 6 on the next round after a golden age. Finally, we're going to end up the Galactic phase by figuring out the new player order. And again, player order is going to be based on the current prestige. So the person who has the highest prestige is going to become the new first player, and then we're going to simply exchange the tokens to keep the player order correct. And again, if there happens to be a tiebreaker, whoever happens to be higher up on the prestige chart right here is the person who's going to break the ties. And that's just going to be a simple tiebreaker when it comes to the prestige board. We're going to keep doing this for a total of 5 different rounds. After the end of the 5th round, we're simply going to add up all the victory points. Whoever has the most victory points in the game is going to be the grand winner. Remember, we're going to gain victory points for a total amount of reputation that we have, or a total amount of prestige. We're going to get victory points for relics. We're going to get victory points for ideologies. We're going to get victory points for our colonized planets. We're going to get victory points for our developed planets. And again, whoever has the most amount of victory points will be the grand winner of the game. Now, there's only one more thing left to explain to you in this very rich, or very small package game, and that's the concept of your major ideology. Now, I know I said at the beginning of the video that you're going to get extra victory points based on the major ideology that you happen to have. And your major ideology is based on the total amount of symbols that you manage to create on your empire for the 3 alliances that you happen to play. The trick here is if you never pick a major ideology, you're not going to get those bonus victory points at all. Now, the way you can counteract that is at any time during the game, you can take one of the cards in your hand as your action for your turn by playing. Remember, you can play these cards from your hand as actions, but you can play a card to form your major ideology. Now, you need to do this before the game comes to an end. If you fail to do this before the end game, or if you fail to have at least 2 symbols to signify what your major ideology is, you can't do this anymore, and you actually lose out on victory points. And the way you're going to do this, you're simply going to pick the ideology that you want based on the cards you have in your hand, and you're simply going to take that card and you're going to place it in a way so that all the other players can see what your new major ideology is. And you're simply going to place it up, and now all players get to see that your major ideology is going to be war, which means you're going to get victory points based on the total amount of planets that you happen to take over throughout the game. So that's the way you're going to get a major ideology if you don't manage to match symbols. But if you do manage to match symbols, then you're going to get your major ideology that way. But even if you happen to match symbols, you can still trump your current ideology by playing a card to make your new major ideology. So that can be part of your strategy, that can be part of your tactics. So make sure you're watching the tactics of the board, watching the tactics of the other player, and knowing when it's a great time to change a major ideology, when it's a good time to reveal what ideology you're going for, or whatever tactics you happen to be going for. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial video, and I hope you enjoy this video series based on Age of Galaxy. If you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them down in the YouTube comments down below. I will definitely get to them as quickly as I can. You can also feel free to email me at off-the-shelf-board-game-reviews. That's otsbgr@gmail.com. I'll be sure to get your email as quickly as I can. If you enjoy this video and this video series, think about supporting the channel over on Patreon. Just $1 in the tip jar can help me cover my costs and help you bring out content that you enjoy for the channel. If you enjoy this video, if you enjoy this video series, click that like button, click that subscribe button, and as always, thanks for watching.